The massive Hell's Angel crumbled right there on the sidewalk, his weathered face wet with tears as he stared at the slice of pizza in the small boy's outstretched hand. Charlotte Caldwell's breath caught. What had her 8-year-old son just done? The biker's tattooed arms trembled, his voice breaking as he tried to speak. "I lost someone," he managed through sobs. "I lost." Around them, Oakdale, California held its breath. This was Marcus Steele, Oakland chapter 6'4" of leather and steel, and patches that warned decent people to cross the street. And he was crying over pizza offered by a child. But Charlotte didn't know yet about the phone call that would come 48 hours later, about the 70 Hell's Angels headed straight for their small town, or about how this single moment would shatter everything her community believed about the people they feared most. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Main Street in Oakdale, California, painting the worn storefronts in shades of amber and gold. Charlotte Caldwell pushed open the glass door of Murphy's Diner, the familiar jingle of the overhead bell announcing their arrival, the scent of fresh coffee and grilled onions wrapped around them like a warm blanket, momentarily pushing away the weight that had settled on her shoulders over the past 18 months. "Can we sit by the window, Mom?" Ethan's small hand tugged at her sleeve, his blue eyes bright with the kind of hope that only 8-year-olds could muster after a long day. His brown hair stuck up in the back where he'd been leaning against the car window during their drive back from Modesto. "Sure, honey." Charlotte managed a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. The vinyl booth by the front window had seen better days, its red surface cracked and patched with duct tape, but Ethan didn't seem to notice. He scrambled onto the seat, pressing his nose against the glass to watch the sparse traffic crawl past. Oakdale had always been a small town, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody else's business, whether you wanted them to or not. The population hovered around 22,000, most folks working the almond orchards or the processing plants that dotted the Central Valley. Charlotte had grown up here, left for college in Sacramento, then returned 8 years ago when she'd gotten pregnant with Ethan. That had been back when she still thought her ex-husband Derek would turn into the man he'd promised to be. She'd been wrong about that. "What can I get you, folks?" Betty Morrison appeared beside their table, her weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. Betty had been waitressing at Murphy's for 30 years, and she'd seen the Caldwell family through good times and bad. She knew without asking that money was tight for Charlotte these days. "Just a small pepperoni pizza to share," Charlotte said, feeling the familiar burn of embarrassment in her cheeks. "And 2 waters, please." "You got it, hun?" Betty's hand briefly touched Charlotte's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that needed no words. Small towns had their drawbacks, but they also had their mercies. Ethan had already pulled out his worn sketchpad, the one Charlotte had bought him at the dollar store 3 months ago. He drew constantly, cowboys, horses, mountains, anything that caught his imagination. The school counselor said he had real talent, that maybe he could apply for special art programs when he got older. Charlotte tried not to think about how she'd pay for something like that. Through the window, she watched Oakdale's Main Street wind down for the evening. The hardware store was closing up, old Mr. Peterson pulling down the metal shutters. Across the street, the Oakdale Cheese and Specialties shop still had a few customers browsing. This town had been built on agriculture and manufacturing, but times were changing. The plant where Charlotte worked as an administrative assistant had announced layoffs last month. She'd survived the first round, but the fear never quite left her stomach. "Mom, look at this one!" Ethan turned his sketchpad around, revealing a surprisingly detailed drawing of a horse running through a field. The perspective wasn't perfect, but the motion was there, captured in pencil strokes that seemed too sophisticated for his age. "That's beautiful, baby." Charlotte's throat tightened. How did children stay so resilient, so full of creativity, even when the world around them was crumbling? The pizza arrived 20 minutes later, steam rising from the melted cheese. It was a small pie, barely 12 inches, but it was hot and fresh, and more than they'd had yesterday. Charlotte had learned to stretch meals, to make do. Ethan reached for a slice immediately, cheese stretching in long strings as he lifted it to his mouth. "Careful, it's hot," Charlotte warned, but Ethan was already blowing on it, his cheeks puffed out like a chipmunk. She took her own slice, savoring the simple pleasure of warm food. Outside, the sun was sinking lower, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. That's when she noticed the motorcycle parked across the street. It was impossible to miss. A massive Harley-Davidson, all chrome and black leather, parked at an angle near the sidewalk. The bike looked old, but meticulously maintained, its engine still ticking as it cooled. Charlotte's stomach tightened. She'd seen bikes like that before, usually in groups, roaring through town on their way to somewhere else. Oakdale wasn't a destination. It was a pass-through, a place to fuel up before heading into the Sierra Nevada foothills. The man sitting on the bench next to the bike matched the machine perfectly. He was enormous, easily 6'4", with broad shoulders that strained against a worn leather vest. Patches covered the vest. She couldn't make out all the details from this distance, but she recognized the distinctive skull logo, Hell's Angels. His arms were covered in faded tattoos, and his grey beard hung down to his chest in a long braid. He wore dark sunglasses despite the fading light, and a red bandana covered most of his hair. Charlotte felt her body tense instinctively. She'd grown up with the stories, the warnings. Motorcycle clubs were dangerous. They dealt drugs, started fights, terrorized decent people. Her own father had crossed the street once when he'd seen bikers coming, pulling young Charlotte with him. "Nothing good comes from people like that," he told her. The man on the bench sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead at nothing in particular. Charlotte noticed he wasn't eating, wasn't drinking, wasn't doing anything except sitting. There was something in his posture, something in the way his massive shoulders seemed to curve inward, that struck her as odd. He looked tired. No, more than tired. He looked defeated. "Mom, is that a real Hell's Angel?" Ethan's voice was hushed but excited, his half-eaten pizza slice forgotten in his hand. "Ethan, don't stare." Charlotte's response was automatic, the same thing her mother had told her. "It's not polite." "But, Mom, eat your pizza, honey." Charlotte turned her attention back to her own plate, willing herself to ignore the presence across the street. This was Oakdale. People passed through all the time. He'd be gone soon, back on the highway, and everything would return to normal. But Ethan kept looking. Charlotte could see his reflection in the window, those blue eyes fixed on the biker with the kind of unwavering attention he usually reserved for his drawings. She was about to tell him again to focus on his food when she saw his brow furrow in that particular way it did, when he was thinking hard about something. "Mom, I don't think he's eaten anything." "Ethan, no, really. He's just sitting there. And he looks really sad." Charlotte glanced out the window again, annoyed at herself for even looking. But Ethan was right. The biker hadn't moved. He sat on that bench like a statue, his hands resting on his knees, his whole body radiating something that Charlotte recognized all too well. Loneliness. She knew that feeling. She'd felt it every night since Derek left. Every morning when she woke up to tackle another day of bills and responsibilities and constant worry. She'd felt it in the grocery store when she had to put items back because she didn't have enough money. She'd felt it at Ethan's school events when other kids had both parents there, cheering them on. "Maybe he doesn't have any money," Ethan said quietly. "Like us sometimes." The words hit Charlotte like a physical blow. She tried so hard to shield Ethan from the worst of it, to make him feel secure, even when she was terrified. But children noticed things. Children saw more than adults gave them credit for. "We're doing fine, baby," she said softly, but the words rang hollow. Ethan looked at his pizza, then back out the window, then at his pizza again. Charlotte could see the wheels turning in his young mind. She knew that look. It was the same expression he got before he gave away his favorite toy to a kid at school who didn't have any. The same look he'd had before, using his birthday money to buy food for the stray cat that lived behind their apartment complex. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice small but determined, "can I give him some of our pizza?" Charlotte's first instinct was to say no. They barely had enough for themselves. This pizza was supposed to be dinner and lunch tomorrow. They couldn't afford to give away food to strangers, especially dangerous-looking strangers who probably had more money than they did anyway. Bikers like that always seemed to have money for their motorcycles, for their leather, for their lifestyle. But then she looked at her son's face, at the genuine concern there, the compassion that somehow hadn't been crushed out of him despite everything they'd been through. And she looked back at the biker, really looked at him this time, past the leather and the patches and the intimidating size. She saw the way his shoulders slumped, the way his head hung just slightly forward. She saw a human being who was hurting. The waitress's words from earlier echoed in her mind. Small towns had their mercies. "Honey, I don't know if that's a good idea," Charlotte started. But even as she said it, she felt something shift inside her. Who was she to teach her son to ignore suffering just because it came in a package that scared her? Who was she to let her own prejudices override the compassion he was trying to show? "Please, Mom. We still have 3 slices left. We can share 2 and he can have 1. Charlotte looked at the remaining pizza. 3 slices. She'd been planning to wrap 2 of them up, take them home for tomorrow. They'd been planning a lot of things lately that didn't quite work out. She took a deep breath. "Okay," she heard herself say, "but I'm coming with you." Ethan's face lit up like Christmas morning. He carefully lifted one of the larger slices, folding a napkin around it to keep from burning his hands. Charlotte's heart hammered as they stood up, as she pushed open the diner door, as the evening air hit her face. What was she doing? What were they doing? But Ethan was already moving forward, his small legs carrying him across the empty street with purpose. Charlotte hurried to keep up, her protective instincts screaming at her to grab him, to pull him back, to return to the safety of the diner. The biker didn't move as they approached. Up close, he was even more intimidating than he'd appeared from the window. His hands were massive, scarred and weathered. The patches on his vest were clearer now. Hell's Angels, Oakland chapter. His tattoos covered every visible inch of skin on his arms, designs that ranged from elaborate to crude, clearly collected over decades. Ethan stopped a few feet away, and Charlotte's hand instinctively found his shoulder. "Excuse me, sir?" Ethan's voice was small but clear. The biker's head turned slowly. He removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were startlingly blue, almost the same shade as Ethan's. Those eyes moved from the boy to Charlotte, then down to the pizza slice in Ethan's outstretched hand. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Charlotte realized she was holding her breath. The late sun caught the chrome of Oakdale's single stoplight, casting fragments of light across Main Street. Inside Murphy's diner, Betty Morrison watched through the window, her hand frozen on the coffee pot she'd been about to refill. Across the street, Mr. Peterson paused in locking up his hardware store, his eyes narrowing at the scene unfolding on the sidewalk. The biker stared at the pizza slice like it was something from another world. Then, to Charlotte's absolute shock, she saw his eyes fill with tears. The massive man's weathered face crumpled, and he lowered his head, his shoulders beginning to shake. He raised one enormous hand to cover his face, and Charlotte heard a sound that made her heart stop, a sob, raw and broken, coming from this intimidating stranger who looked like he could tear apart a car with his bare hands. "I'm sorry," the biker's voice came out rough, choked. "I'm sorry, He couldn't finish the sentence. Ethan stood perfectly still, the pizza still extended. Charlotte felt frozen, her mind racing. This wasn't what she'd expected. Nothing about this moment made sense with everything she'd been taught to believe about people like him. The biker took a shuddering breath, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. When he looked up again, his face was streaked with tears, but something like wonder had replaced the despair. "How old are you, son?" His voice was gentler than Charlotte would have thought possible from someone so large. 8, Ethan answered. "Are you hungry, mister? You can have this slice. We have more." The biker looked at Charlotte, then really looked at her, and she saw the question in his eyes. "Is this real? Is this child really offering me food?" Charlotte found herself nodding, even as part of her brain screamed that this was insane, that they should walk away, that nothing good could come from this interaction. But something deeper, something more fundamental, told her to stay. "My name's Ethan," her son continued, apparently unconcerned by the tears running down the stranger's face. "What's yours?" The biker took the pizza slice with trembling hands, handling it like it was made of glass. "Marcus," he said finally. "My name's Marcus Steele." He set the pizza carefully on the bench beside him, as if he needed a moment before he could actually eat it. "Are you okay, Mr. Marcus?" Ethan's concern was genuine, his young face creased with worry. "You look really sad." Marcus let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Yeah, kid. I've been better." He glanced at Charlotte again, and she saw him notice her hand on Ethan's shoulder, the protective gesture that she couldn't help. "Your boy's got a good heart, ma'am. You raised him right." Charlotte didn't know what to say to that. She managed a small nod. "I lost someone," Marcus said, apparently needing to explain himself, to justify the tears that continued to slide down his face despite his efforts to stop them. "Someone real important. Just got the news this morning. Been riding for 12 hours straight, trying to outrun it, I guess." He shook his head. "Didn't even realize I'd stopped here until I'd already shut off the engine." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, with the simple directness of children who haven't yet learned to be uncomfortable with grief. "My dad left us. That made my mom really sad for a long time. She still gets sad sometimes, but she tries not to show me." "Ethan!" Charlotte started, embarrassed by the revelation, but Marcus was looking at her differently now, and she saw something shift in his expression. Recognition. Understanding. The knowledge that passed between people who had survived loss, who knew what it meant to wake up every morning and choose to keep going despite everything. "Life's hard sometimes," Marcus said, still talking to Ethan but his eyes on Charlotte. "But having people who care, people who show kindness even when they don't have to, that makes it bearable. You know that?" Ethan nodded seriously, as if he understood far more than an 8-year-old should. Marcus picked up the pizza slice then, and Charlotte watched as this massive, terrifying biker, this Hell's Angel with the skull patches and the scars and the prison yard tattoos, took a bite and closed his eyes like he was tasting something holy. He chewed slowly, deliberately, and when he swallowed, more tears came. "Best pizza I've ever had," he said, his voice thick. "Thank you, kid. Thank you." Across the street, Betty Morrison had stepped outside the diner, watching. Mr. Peterson had abandoned his lock entirely. 2 more people had appeared on the sidewalk, drawn by the unusual sight. Charlotte felt their stares, felt the weight of their judgment and curiosity. She knew how this looked. She knew what they were thinking. But looking at Marcus, at his tear-stained face and trembling hands, at the way he held that pizza slice like it was the most precious thing in the world, she didn't care. "You can come inside if you want," Ethan offered. "We have 2 more slices." "No, no." Marcus shook his head firmly. "This is perfect right here. You've already given me more than you know." He took another bite, savoring it. "Where are you folks from?" "We live here," Ethan said proudly. In Oakdale. Mom works at the processing plant and I go to Valley Oak Elementary. I like to draw. Yeah? What do you draw? Horses mostly. And mountains. And sometimes cowboys. Cowboys, huh? Marcus smiled, and the expression transformed his face entirely. Without the grimness, without the weight of grief, he looked almost gentle. You know Oakdale calls itself the cowboy capital of the world. Really? Ethan's eyes went wide. Really? They have a big rodeo every year, biggest in this part of California. Marcus finished the pizza slice and carefully wiped his hands on the napkin Ethan had provided. My brother loved rodeos, used to compete when he was younger. That's who I lost. My brother Ray, 71 years old, tougher than nails. Cancer finally got him this morning. Oh, Ethan's face fell. I'm really sorry, Mr. Marcus. Me too, kid. Me too. Marcus stood up slowly, unfolding to his full height. Charlotte instinctively pulled Ethan closer, then felt ashamed of the gesture. But Marcus didn't seem offended. He looked at the motorcycle, then back at them. I should get back on the road. Got a long way to go before I hit Oakland. Will you be okay? Ethan asked. Charlotte's heart broke a little at the question, at her son's innocent concern for this stranger who represented everything their town feared. Yeah, Marcus said, and this time he sounded like he meant it. Yeah, I think I will be. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a card, worn and creased from years of carrying. This has my number on it. If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you call me. Understand? Charlotte took the card automatically. It was simple, just a name and a phone number. Marcus Steele. No business name, no title, just the essentials. I mean it, Marcus said, looking directly at Charlotte now. World needs more people like your boy, like you, raising him to see people instead of just their outsides. You call if you need help. Any kind of help. Thank you, Charlotte managed to say. That's very kind. Marcus shook his head. Kindness is what you just showed me. I'm just trying to pay it forward. He looked at Ethan one more time. You keep drawing those cowboys, kid, and you keep that good heart. Don't let the world beat it out of you. I won't, Ethan promised. Marcus put his sunglasses back on, threw one leg over the Harley and fired up the engine. The roar was deafening, echoing off the storefronts. But before he pulled away, he gave them a salute, a simple gesture that somehow felt profound. Then he was gone, the motorcycle's rumble fading as he headed west toward Highway 120. Charlotte and Ethan stood on the sidewalk, watching until the bike disappeared around the bend. The sun had nearly set now, painting everything in deep purples and blues. Charlotte realized she was still holding the business card, her fingers tight around it. Mom? Ethan looked up at her. Was that okay? That we gave him the pizza? Charlotte looked down at her son, at his earnest face and worried eyes. She knelt down to his level, putting her hands on his small shoulders. That was more than okay, baby, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That was one of the best things I've ever seen you do. He seemed really nice, Ethan said, even though he looked scary at first. Yeah, Charlotte said, glancing at the card in her hand one more time before slipping it into her pocket. Yeah, he did. They walked back to Murphy's Diner, where Betty was waiting with their pizza boxed up and a knowing smile on her face. Charlotte didn't miss the way the other customers stared, the whispered conversations that died when she passed. She'd hear about this tomorrow, she was sure. Small towns never forgot anything. But as they drove home through the darkening streets, Ethan chattering about Marcus and his motorcycle and how cool the patches looked, Charlotte found she didn't care what people would say. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something like hope. She had no idea that in less than 48 hours, that simple act of sharing pizza would change everything. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of California spring day that made tourist brochures look honest. Charlotte woke to her alarm at 6:15, the same as always, and followed the same routine she'd followed for the past 2 years. Shower, coffee, wake Ethan, breakfast, drive him to school, arrive at work by 8:30. The processing plant where she worked sat on the outskirts of town, a sprawling complex of metal buildings and loading docks where almonds came in from the surrounding orchards and left as packaged products headed for stores across the country. Charlotte's desk sat in a corner of the administrative office, surrounded by filing cabinets and the constant hum of industrial machinery from the plant floor below. Her supervisor, Janet Reeves, was already at her desk when Charlotte arrived, pecking at her keyboard with 2 fingers and scowling at the screen. "Morning, Charlotte." Janet didn't look up. "Got about 15 invoices that need processing. They're on your desk." "Got it." Charlotte settled into her chair, booting up her ancient computer. The machine wheezed to life like it did every morning, taking its sweet time loading. She'd requested an upgrade 6 months ago. Still waiting. She was 3 invoices deep when her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan's school. Her heart jumped. Texts from school were never good news. But this one was just a reminder about the spring fair next week, asking for parent volunteers. Charlotte deleted it. She couldn't take time off work, not with the layoffs looming. "Hey, did you hear about the Caldwell kid?" Janet's voice cut through Charlotte's focus. She was talking to Marissa from accounting, who'd just walked in with a bagel. Charlotte's fingers froze on the keyboard. "What about him?" Marissa asked, settling into her desk across the office. "Apparently he gave food to some biker yesterday. A Hell's Angel." Janet's tone carried that particular mix of scandal and judgment that small-town gossip thrived on. "My sister saw the whole thing from her car. Said Charlotte just let him walk right up to this huge, dangerous-looking guy." "You're kidding." Marissa's eyes went wide. What was she thinking? Charlotte felt heat creep up her neck. She should say something, should defend herself, but the words stuck in her throat. "Who knows?" Janet continued, apparently forgetting or not caring that Charlotte was 10 feet away. "Some people just don't have good judgment. Raising a kid alone like that, no father figure around, the boy's probably acting out, trying to get attention." "Hell's Angels, though." Marissa shook her head. "That's dangerous. What if the guy had been violent? What if he tried to take the kid?" "Exactly what I said." Janet finally looked up, her eyes meeting Charlotte's across the office. There was no apology in them, no embarrassment at being overheard. Just that same judgment, that same certainty that Charlotte had somehow failed as a mother. Kids need structure, discipline, not being taught to approach dangerous strangers. Charlotte stared at her computer screen, her vision blurring. She wanted to tell them about Marcus's tears, about his grief, about the way he'd treated that pizza slice like a sacred gift. She wanted to explain that Ethan had seen a suffering human being and responded with compassion, that her son had recognized something she'd almost missed entirely, but she didn't say any of that. She just turned back to her invoices, swallowing the lump in her throat. The rest of the day crawled by in a haze of spreadsheets and passive-aggressive comments. By the time Charlotte picked up Ethan from school, she had a headache that felt like it was splitting her skull in half. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, as Ethan climbed into the car, his backpack nearly as big as he was. "Good. We learned about the water cycle in science, and I got an A on my spelling test." "That's wonderful, baby." Charlotte pulled out of the school parking lot, joining the line of cars headed home. "Did anything else happen?" Ethan hesitated, and Charlotte's mom radar immediately pinged. "What is it?" "Some kids at lunch were talking about yesterday," Ethan said quietly. "About the biker. They said their parents said we shouldn't have done that he was dangerous." Charlotte's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What do you think?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the passing almond orchards. "I think Mr. Marcus was sad." and I think giving him food was the right thing to do. Even if he looked scary. I think you're right, Charlotte said and meant it. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the easy thing, or the thing everyone agrees with. Mrs. Patterson said that people in motorcycle clubs are criminals. Charlotte took a deep breath. Mrs. Patterson was Ethan's teacher, a woman in her 50s who taught in Oakdale for 30 years and had strong opinions about everything. Mrs. Patterson doesn't know Mr. Marcus, neither do those other kids' parents. They're judging based on how he looks, not on who he is. But isn't that prejudice? We learned about that in social studies, when you judge people before you know them. Yes, honey, that's exactly what it is. They drove the rest of the way home in silence. Their apartment was in one of Oakdale's older complexes, the kind built in the 70s with thin walls and perpetually broken parking lot lights. Charlotte had been trying to save up for a better place, but every time she got close, something happened. Car repairs, medical bills, the washing machine breaking. Lately it felt like they were running in place, exhausting themselves without getting anywhere. Inside, Charlotte started dinner, spaghetti because the pasta had been on sale, while Ethan did his homework at their tiny kitchen table. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms and a bathroom that desperately needed updating, but it was theirs. Charlotte had worked hard to make it feel like home, hanging Ethan's drawings on the walls, keeping everything clean and organized. They were eating when Charlotte's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, probably a telemarketer, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Charlotte Caldwell?" The voice was male, unfamiliar, gruff. "Yes, who is this?" "Name's Bear. I'm a friend of Marcus Steele's." Charlotte's fork clattered against her plate. Ethan looked up, curious. "Marcus told us about what your boy did yesterday," Bear continued, "about the pizza. Wanted me to reach out, see if there was anything we could do for you folks." "Oh, that's really not necessary. Marcus says it is. Says your kid showed him kindness when he needed it most, when nobody else would even look at him. That means something." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and sharp. It was just a slice of pizza. "Wasn't just anything, Mom. Not to Marcus, not to any of us." Bear paused. "Look, I know you probably got reservations about us. Most folks do. But we take care of our own, and we take care of people who take care of our own. Marcus is family. Your boy helped family. That makes you family, too." "I don't understand." "You will. Just wanted to give you a heads up. We're coming through Oakdale on Saturday, riding through on our way to a memorial service for Marcus's brother. Whole Oakland chapter, plus some others. We'd like to stop by, pay our respects to your boy. Thank him properly." Charlotte's blood went cold. "How many people are we talking about?" "About 70 riders, give or take." 70. 70 Hell's Angels coming to her town because her 8-year-old son had shared a slice of pizza. Charlotte's mind raced through all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. The stares they'd gotten yesterday would be nothing compared to this. The gossip, the judgment, the fear, it would be overwhelming. "I really don't think that's a good idea," Charlotte said, trying to keep her voice steady. "This is a small town. People here aren't used to—" "Bikers?" Bear's voice held a hint of amusement. "Yeah, we figured. But see, that's kind of the point. People need to learn that we're not what they think we are. Your boy already figured it out. Maybe it's time the rest of Oakdale caught up." "I appreciate the thought, but honestly, I'd rather keep things quiet. We've already had some backlash from yesterday. I don't want to make things harder for my son." Bear was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus said you'd probably say that. Said you seemed like the kind of person who tries to avoid making waves. But here's the thing, Charlotte, and I hope you don't mind me being direct. Sometimes waves need making. Sometimes people need to have their comfortable prejudices challenged, and sometimes a little boy who shows exceptional kindness deserves to be celebrated, not hidden away because the neighbors might talk. Charlotte didn't know what to say to that. "We'll be there Saturday afternoon around 3, Bear said. "Murphy's Diner, right? That's where it happened?" "Please." "It's already done, ma'am. But if it makes you feel any better, we'll be on our best behavior. No drinking, no fighting, no intimidation. Just a bunch of riders wanting to say thank you to a special kid. That's all." The line went dead before Charlotte could protest further. She sat staring at her phone, her dinner forgotten. Ethan was watching her with wide eyes. "Who was that, Mom?" Charlotte set down her phone carefully. "That was a friend of Mr. Marcus's. They want to come visit on Saturday, to say thank you." "Really?" Ethan's face lit up. "That's cool. Honey, it's not just one person, it's a lot of people. About 70. Ethan's eyes went even wider. 70 Hells Angels. Coming here? Coming to Murphy's Diner, yes. Wow. Ethan processed this information with the enthusiasm only a child could muster. "Can we go? Can we meet them?" Charlotte looked at her son's excited face and felt something crack in her chest. He didn't see the danger, didn't understand the social complications, didn't worry about what the neighbors would think. He just saw the possibility of meeting more people like Marcus, more people who might surprise him. When had she lost that ability? When had she started seeing threats instead of opportunities? "Yeah," Charlotte heard herself say. "Yeah, we can go." She barely slept that night, her mind churning through scenarios. By Friday morning, word had spread through Oakdale like wildfire. Charlotte wasn't sure how. Maybe someone had overheard her phone conversation. Maybe the Hells Angels had contacted the town directly. Maybe gossip had just reached its natural conclusion. But by lunchtime, everyone knew. Janet confronted her in the break room. "Is it true? Are you really bringing those people here?" "I'm not bringing anyone anywhere," Charlotte said, keeping her voice level. "They're coming on their own." "But because of your son, because of what he did." Janet's face was flushed with anger or fear or both. "Do you have any idea what this could mean? This is a peaceful town. We don't want trouble. They're not coming to cause trouble. They're coming to say thank you. They're criminals, Charlotte, gangs. They deal drugs and commit violence and God knows what else." "You don't know that." Charlotte surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "You're assuming. You're judging. You're doing exactly what Ethan's being taught not to do in school. Don't you dare lecture me. Then don't lecture me about my son's compassion." Charlotte stood up, abandoning her half-eaten sandwich. "He saw someone in pain and he helped. If that makes me a bad mother in your eyes, then I guess I'll live with that." She walked out before Janet could respond, her heart pounding. She'd never talked to her supervisor like that before. She'd probably just guaranteed herself a spot in the next round of layoffs, but somehow she couldn't bring herself to care. Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm temperatures. Charlotte dressed carefully, choosing jeans and a simple blouse. Nothing too formal or too casual. Ethan couldn't stop bouncing around the apartment, chattering non-stop about motorcycles and Mr. Marcus and whether all 70 riders would have cool patches like the ones he'd seen. They arrived at Murphy's Diner at 2:30, half an hour before the appointed time. The parking lot was empty, except for Betty's old Buick and the cook's pickup truck. Charlotte parked and sat for a moment, her hands tight on the steering wheel. "You okay, Mom?" Ethan asked. "Yeah, baby. Just nervous." "Why? They're nice people." Charlotte looked at her son, at his absolute certainty, his complete lack of fear. "How do you know that? You only met one of them." "Because Mr. Marcus was nice. And his friends wouldn't be mean if he's not mean. That's how friends work." The simple logic was undeniable. Charlotte took a deep breath and got out of the car. Betty met them at the door, her expression unreadable. You're really going through with this? Apparently, Charlotte said. They're coming whether we're here or not. Brave girl. Betty's face softened slightly. Or foolish. Haven't decided which yet. But either way, I've got coffee ready and enough tables cleared to fit a small army. If they're buying, I'm serving. They sat at the same booth by the window, where this had all started. Ethan pressed his nose against the glass, watching for the first sign of motorcycles. Charlotte tried to drink her coffee, but her stomach was in knots. At precisely 3 o'clock, she heard them. The sound started as a distant rumble, like thunder on the horizon. Then it grew, building in volume and intensity until the entire diner seemed to vibrate. Charlotte watched as Ethan's eyes went wide, his mouth dropping open. The first motorcycle appeared around the corner, then another, then another. They kept coming, a seemingly endless stream of chrome and leather and roaring engines. They filled Main Street, pulled into Murphy's parking lot, lined up along the curb. Harley-Davidsons of every description, Road Kings and Softails and Diners, their engines creating a symphony of mechanical thunder. Charlotte counted. 10, 20, 40, 60 more. The riders dismounted, and Charlotte's breath caught. They were exactly what she'd feared, big men and a few women, all heavily tattooed, all wearing the distinctive Hells Angels patches. They looked dangerous. They looked like the kind of people you cross the street to avoid. But then Marcus appeared, pushing through the crowd. He'd cleaned up since Wednesday. His beard was neatly braided, his leather vest brushed clean. When he saw Ethan through the window, his weathered face split into a genuine smile. He walked into Murphy's diner, and the entire group followed him. Betty stood behind the counter, coffee pot frozen in mid-air. The cook had emerged from the kitchen, his face pale. But Marcus ignored them both, walking straight to Charlotte and Ethan's booth. "Hey there, little man," he said, his voice warm. "Remember me?" "Mr. Marcus!" Ethan practically jumped out of his seat. "You came back!" "Told you I would, and I brought some friends. They all wanted to meet the kid with the biggest heart in Oakdale." Charlotte looked at the sea of leather and patches filling the diner. Every pair of eyes was fixed on her son. She felt like she might pass out. But then something unexpected happened. A woman stepped forward from the group, older than Charlotte, with silver hair, in a long ponytail, and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "I'm Diane," she said, extending her hand to Ethan. "Marcus told us about what you did for him. That was real special, kid." "Thanks," Ethan said, shaking her hand with the solemnity of a business deal. Another rider approached, a massive man with a scar running down his face. Charlotte instinctively tensed, but he knelt down to Ethan's level, making himself smaller, less threatening. "Name's Tiny," he said, and several of the other riders chuckled. "Marcus says you like to draw." "Yeah!" Ethan's enthusiasm broke through his nervousness. "Mostly horses and cowboys." "No kidding. I used to ride bulls back in the day. Lost a couple teeth learning how." Tiny grinned, showing the gaps. "Maybe I could tell you about it sometime. Give you some ideas for your drawings." One by one, the Hells Angels approached Ethan, not crowding him, but giving him their attention, their respect. They introduced themselves. Bear, who Charlotte recognized from the phone call. Maggie, who ran a motorcycle repair shop in Oakland. Snake, who was a grandfather of 4. Razor, who worked as a welder. They weren't the faceless monsters from her imagination. They were people, complex, flawed, human people with jobs and families and stories. Marcus stayed close to Charlotte, perhaps sensing her barely contained panic. "I know this is overwhelming," he said quietly. "But we wanted to do something. Wanted to show that kid that kindness matters, that it gets recognized and appreciated." It's a lot," Charlotte managed. "I get it. Your town's gonna talk. People are gonna judge. But maybe that's okay. Maybe they need to see that the scary bikers are just folks who care about loyalty and respect and taking care of each other. No different from anybody else, really. Outside, Charlotte could see people gathering, residents of Oakdale, drawn by the noise and the spectacle. She saw Sheriff Martin standing across the street, his hand resting on his radio. She saw Mrs. Patterson from Ethan's school, her face tight with disapproval. She saw Janet from work, along with half a dozen other familiar faces. They were all watching, all judging. And suddenly, Charlotte didn't care. She looked at her son, surrounded by these intimidating strangers who were treating him like he'd hung the moon. She saw the joy on his face, the pride, the validation that his simple act of kindness had meant something. She saw Marcus, the grief still visible in his eyes but tempered now by something like hope. Betty appeared at their table, her serving smile firmly in place. "Who wants coffee?" she asked the assembled bikers. "And we've got fresh apple pie. My treat for anyone who's hungry." The tension broke like a wave against rocks. The Hells Angels began ordering, filling the diner with conversation and laughter. Someone produced a camera, one of the older riders, a man named Grizzly, who said he wanted a picture to remember the day. "Can we get one with the kid?" he asked Charlotte. "All of us, together." Charlotte looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "It's up to you, ma'am. We'll respect whatever you decide." She thought about Janet's judgment, about the neighbors' stares, about all the ways this could be used against them later. She thought about the safe, quiet life she'd been trying to maintain, the low profile she'd been keeping. Then she thought about Ethan's face when he'd offered that pizza slice, about the compassion that had driven that gesture, about the kind of man she wanted her son to become. "Okay," she said. "Let's take a picture." They gathered outside, all 70-plus Hells Angels, arranging themselves on and around their motorcycles. Ethan stood in the center, Marcus's hand on his shoulder, grinning so wide Charlotte thought his face might split. Charlotte stood nearby, feeling awkward and out of place, but also strangely protected by this wall of leather and chrome. Grizzly set up his camera on a tripod, fiddling with the timer. The crowd across the street had grown larger, more curious than hostile now. Sheriff Martin had crossed over, standing at a respectful distance, but watching carefully. "Everybody smile!" Grizzly called out. The flash went off, capturing the moment forever. 70 Hells Angels and one 8-year-old boy, united by a slice of pizza and an act of compassion. After the photo, Marcus pulled something from his saddlebag. It was a leather vest, small enough to fit a child, with custom patches sewn on. But these weren't the Hells Angels patches. Those were earned through years of loyalty and brotherhood. Instead, the vest had a simple patch on the back. "Honorary Friend of Oakland Chapter." "We had this made special," Marcus said, helping Ethan into the vest. "It doesn't make you a member. You're way too young for that, and your mom would kill us." He smiled at Charlotte. "But it means you're recognized. You're respected. And if you ever need anything, you've got 70 brothers and sisters who'll have your back." Ethan stroked the leather reverently, his eyes shining. "Really, really," Marcus confirmed. "You showed me something important, kid. You showed me that humanity still exists, that good people still care about strangers who are hurting. You reminded me why Ray and I joined this club in the first place, because it's supposed to be about family, about taking care of your own and standing up for what's right." He turned to the assembled riders. "This kid represents everything we're supposed to be about. He didn't see my patches or my tats or my beard. He saw a person who was sad and hungry, and he helped. No judgment, no conditions, just pure, simple kindness." His voice grew stronger, carrying across the parking lot to the watching townspeople. "Maybe, if more people in the world had hearts like this kid, we wouldn't have all the division and hate we see every day. Maybe we'd just have people helping people, the way it's supposed to be." Several of the riders nodded, murmuring agreement. Charlotte saw Diane wiping tears from her eyes. Tiny had his massive arms crossed over his chest, but his expression was soft. "So here's what we're gonna do," Marcus continued. "Every one of us is gonna buy something from this diner. Coffee, pie, whatever. We're gonna support the business that fed me when I needed it, and we're gonna leave a tip that'll make sure Betty here knows we appreciate her hospitality." What followed was organized chaos. The Hells Angels filed into Murphy's diner in groups, ordering food and coffee, chatting with Betty and the cook. They were polite, patient, respectful. They cleaned up after themselves, said please and thank you, treated the place like a church, and they tipped. Charlotte watched in amazement as bills piled up on the counter, 5s, 10s, 20s, even a few hundreds. By the time the last rider had paid, Betty was staring at more than $3,000 in cash. "I can't accept this," Betty protested, but her hands were shaking as she looked at the money. "You can and you will," Bear said firmly. "Consider it payment for putting up with our loud entrance and for being willing to serve us when a lot of places wouldn't, and for making damn good apple pie." Outside, the crowd had grown even larger. Charlotte recognized most of the faces, neighbors, co-workers, people she'd known for years. Their expressions ranged from amazement to fear to grudging respect. Sheriff Martin had moved closer, but he hadn't intervened, hadn't tried to shut anything down. Marcus walked over to the sheriff, extending his hand. "Afternoon, officer. Just wanted to introduce myself. Marcus Steele, Oakland chapter. We're not here to cause trouble, just paying our respects to a special kid." Sheriff Martin hesitated, then shook the offered hand. "So I gathered. Long as things stay peaceful, we won't have a problem." "They will," Marcus assured him. "We're just here to thank a little boy who showed an old biker some kindness when nobody else would, that's all." The sheriff looked at Ethan, still wearing his honorary vest, and talking animatedly with Tiny about bull riding. Something in his weathered face softened. "That's Tom Caldwell's grandson, isn't it? Charlotte's boy?" "Yes, sir," Marcus confirmed. "Fine woman raising a fine son. Always liked Tom, good man, worked hard, treated people right." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Seems like good character runs in that family." As the afternoon wore on, something remarkable happened. The barrier between the townspeople and the bikers began to dissolve, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, Oakdale residents approached the Hells Angels. They asked questions about the motorcycles, about the club, about the rides they'd taken. The bikers answered patiently, showing off their bikes, explaining the patches and symbols. Mrs. Patterson, Ethan's teacher, even approached Marcus directly. "I owe you an apology," she said stiffly. "I judged you without knowing you. I taught my students not to do that, but I did it myself." Marcus smiled gently. "We all make assumptions, Mom. It's human nature. The important thing is being willing to change your mind when you get new information." By 5 o'clock, Murphy's Diner looked like the site of an impromptu town festival. The Hells Angels were teaching kids how to sit on motorcycles safely, showing them the controls, letting them rev the engines. Parents who'd been terrified 4 hours ago were laughing and taking pictures. The fear had transformed into curiosity, then into something approaching camaraderie. Bear found Charlotte standing on the sidewalk, watching the scene unfold. "Didn't expect this, did you?" "No," Charlotte admitted. "I expected disaster. I expected anger and fear and my son being ostracized even more than he probably will be already." "Kid's not going to be ostracized," Bear said confidently. "He's going to be celebrated, trust me. Small towns love a good story, and this is one hell of a story. Boy shows kindness to a stranger, stranger turns out to be part of a famous motorcycle club. Club comes to honor the boy. It's the kind of thing that gets talked about for decades." Charlotte hoped he was right. As the sun began to set, the Hells Angels started preparing to leave. They formed up on their motorcycles, engines rumbling to life in a coordinated thunder. Marcus approached Ethan one last time, kneeling down to the boy's level. "You keep being exactly who you are," he said seriously. "Don't let anyone tell you that kindness is weakness. It's the strongest thing a person can be, understand?" "Yes, sir," Ethan said. "Will I see you again?" "Count on it, kid. Oakland's not that far from here. We'll ride through again, check on you. Make sure you're still drawing those cowboys." Marcus stood and looked at Charlotte. "You're doing an amazing job with him, Mom. Don't let anyone tell you different." "Thank you," Charlotte said, and meant it with everything in her. The Hells Angels departed the way they'd arrived, in a roar of engines and a cloud of exhaust. But they left behind something profound. They left behind a changed town, a community that had been forced to confront its own prejudices and found them wanting. As Charlotte and Ethan watched the last motorcycle disappear around the corner, Betty came out of the diner. She was carrying something wrapped in a napkin. "Last slice of pie," she said, handing it to Ethan. "On the house, for the boy who reminded this whole town what really matters." That night, Charlotte tucked Ethan into bed in his small room, his honorary vest hanging carefully on the back of his door. He was still talking, reliving every moment of the afternoon, but his eyes were drooping. "Mom," he said as she was about to leave. "Yeah, baby? I'm glad we gave Mr. Marcus that pizza, even if people were mean about it at first." Charlotte sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Me too, honey. You taught me something important today. You taught me that it's worth doing the right thing, even when it's scary." "Was it scary for you?" "Terrifying," Charlotte admitted, "but you were brave enough for both of us." Ethan smiled sleepily. "I just wanted to help." He looked so sad. "I know, and you did help. More than you know." She kissed his forehead and turned off the light, leaving the door cracked open the way he liked. In the kitchen, she made herself a cup of tea and sat at the table, pulling out her phone. Social media was exploding with pictures and videos from the afternoon. The image of Ethan surrounded by 70 Hells Angels had already been shared hundreds of times. The comments were overwhelmingly positive, though there were still some voices of disapproval. But the tide had turned. Charlotte could feel it. The town had seen something today that challenged everything they thought they knew. They'd seen humanity in the people they'd been taught to fear. They'd seen kindness recognized and celebrated. Maybe Bear was right. Maybe this would become the story that Oakdale told about itself for decades to come. The day a little boy taught a whole town about compassion. Charlotte saved Marcus's number in her phone, then typed out a quick message. "Thank you for today. You gave my son something precious, the knowledge that his kindness matters." The response came almost immediately. "Thank you. Your boy gave me hope when I needed it most. That's worth more than all the motorcycles in Oakland." Charlotte smiled, setting down her phone. Through the window, she could see Oakdale settling in for the night, lights coming on in houses up and down the street. It looked the same as it had yesterday, as it did every night. But something fundamental had shifted. In one afternoon, 70 Hells Angels had proven that people were more than their appearances, more than their reputations, more than the stories others told about them. They'd proven that sometimes the scariest-looking people have the biggest hearts, and they'd shown an entire town that an 8-year-old boy had understood something that most adults had forgotten, that everyone deserves compassion, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Charlotte finished her tea and headed to bed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles. Money would still be tight. The processing plant might still lay her off. Life would still be hard. But today, for the first time in a long time, she'd been part of something beautiful, something that mattered, something that proved the world could still surprise you in the best possible ways. And that was worth more than any amount of money or security or comfortable certainty. That was worth everything. The next morning, Charlotte woke to find her phone buzzing with notifications. She blinked sleep from her eyes, checking the screen. Text messages, social media alerts, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Her heart rate kicked up. What now? But as she scrolled through the messages, her anxiety transformed into something else entirely. Your son is an inspiration. Thank you for teaching our community about compassion. The Caldwells showed us all what it means to see people, not stereotypes. The video from yesterday had gone viral overnight. Not just in Oakdale, not just in California, but across the country. News outlets were picking it up. Someone had created a hashtag, #CacaPizzaKindness. The image of Ethan in his honorary vest, surrounded by 70 Hell's Angels, was everywhere. Charlotte sat up in bed, scrolling through article after article. Most were positive, celebrating the story as an example of unexpected humanity. Some were critical, questioning whether it was appropriate to celebrate a motorcycle club, regardless of their actions. A few were downright nasty, calling Charlotte irresponsible and Ethan's gesture naive. But the overwhelming response was support. By the time Ethan woke up, Charlotte had received 17 interview requests from various media outlets, 3 invitations to appear on morning shows, and a message from the principal of Valley Oak Elementary asking if Ethan would be comfortable talking to his classmates about the experience during an assembly. "Mom, why is your phone making so much noise?" Ethan shuffled into the kitchen, his hair sticking up in every direction. "Because people really liked what you did yesterday," Charlotte said, still slightly dazed. "Like a lot of people, all over the country." "Really?" Ethan's eyes went wide. "Can I see?" Charlotte showed him some of the articles and videos, carefully filtering out the negative comments. She watched his face as he processed the attention, looking for signs of overwhelm or anxiety. But Ethan just seemed pleased in the uncomplicated way that children could be. "That's cool," he said. "Can I have pancakes?" Charlotte laughed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Yeah, baby, you can have pancakes." Monday morning arrived with a mix of dread and anticipation. Charlotte had spent Sunday fielding calls and messages, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, even as their world turned upside down. She'd agreed to one interview with a local news station, scheduled for Wednesday afternoon, but had turned down everything else. The attention was overwhelming, and she wanted to protect Ethan's privacy as much as possible. The processing plant felt different when Charlotte arrived. People stared, but it wasn't with judgment anymore. It was with curiosity, with something approaching respect. Even Janet, who'd been so critical on Friday, approached Charlotte's desk with an unusual expression on her face. "I saw the videos," Janet said stiffly. "The way those bikers treated your son. It was actually quite moving." Charlotte blinked in surprise. "Thank you. I was wrong about what I said, about your judgment. You raised a good kid, Charlotte, better than most." Janet hesitated, then added, "Better than mine, probably. My daughter's the same age as Ethan, and I don't know if she would have done what he did. I don't know if I've taught her to see people the way you've taught him." "It's not too late," Charlotte said gently. "Kids learn from watching us. If we change, they change." Janet nodded, something shifting in her expression. Yeah, you're right." She returned to her desk, and Charlotte felt like she'd just witnessed something significant. A small crack in the wall of prejudice, letting light seep through. At Valley Oak Elementary, Ethan was greeted like a celebrity. Kids crowded around him in the hallway, asking about the motorcycles, about the Hells Angels, about his honorary vest. Mrs. Patterson had apparently used the incident as a teaching moment, discussing with the class the importance of looking beyond appearances and showing compassion to all people. "Your son sparked a really important conversation," Mrs. Patterson told Charlotte when she picked Ethan up that afternoon. "We've been talking about prejudice and stereotypes all day. The kids are really engaged with the topic now because they can relate it to something real that happened here in their community." "I'm glad some good came out of it," Charlotte said. "More than some good. This is the kind of lesson they'll remember for the rest of their lives." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "You know, I've been teaching for 30 years, and I've seen a lot of kids come through this school. Most of them are good kids, kind in the normal ways, but every once in a while you meet a child who's special, who sees the world with unusual clarity. Your son is one of those children, Mrs. Caldwell. He's going to do remarkable things with his life." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. That means a lot." By Wednesday, the initial media frenzy had started to die down. Charlotte and Ethan went to the local news station for their interview, sitting under bright lights, while a friendly reporter asked gentle questions about what had happened and why Ethan had chosen to help Marcus. "He just looked sad," Ethan said simply, his small voice clear in the studio. "And I had pizza. It seemed like the right thing to do." "Were you scared?" the reporter asked. Ethan thought about this seriously. A little bit at first. He was really big and had lots of tattoos. But then I saw his eyes, and they were just regular person eyes. Sad eyes. And I thought if I was sad and hungry, I'd want someone to help me. The segment aired that evening, a 3-minute piece on the local news that focused on the themes of kindness, community, and looking beyond appearances. Charlotte watched it with Ethan curled up beside her on the couch, and she felt a surge of pride, so strong it almost hurt. This was her son, this brave, compassionate, remarkable little boy who saw the world so clearly. The following Saturday, Charlotte was working in their small apartment kitchen when her phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Hey," she answered. "How are you?" "Doing better," Marcus said, and he sounded like he meant it. "It'd been a tough week with Ray's funeral and everything, but every time I felt like I was drowning in grief, I'd think about your boy and that pizza. Reminded me that there's still good in the world, that people still care. I'm glad it helped." "It did more than help, Charlotte. It saved me. I was in a dark place that day, really dark. If Ethan hadn't shown me that kindness, I don't know what I would have done. But seeing that pure compassion, that lack of judgment, it pulled me back from the edge." Charlotte felt her throat tighten. "I had no idea." "How could you?" "But I wanted you to know. Wanted you to understand that what your son did wasn't just nice. It was life-changing. For me, yeah, but also for a lot of other people. You see how the story's spreading?" "It's been overwhelming," Charlotte admitted. "I know, but it's important. People need to see this. They need to understand that humanity transcends appearances, that kindness matters, that we're all just people trying to make it through this world." Marcus paused. "Also, I wanted to let you know that the club took a vote. We're establishing a scholarship fund in Ray's name for kids who demonstrate exceptional compassion and character. First recipient is going to be Ethan when he's ready for college." "Marcus, you don't have to. We want to. Ray would have loved this story. He always said that the best way to honor someone's memory is to make the world a little better than they left it. This scholarship is part of that. We're starting with $25,000, and we'll add to it every year." Charlotte couldn't speak. $25,000 for Ethan's education, the thing she'd been desperately trying to save for, the thing that had seemed impossible. "Charlotte, you there?" "I'm here," she managed. I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. Your boy gave me hope. This is us trying to give him opportunities. It's a fair trade." After the call ended, Charlotte sat in her kitchen for a long time, crying quietly. Not tears of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming gratitude and relief. For the first time since Derek left, Since the layoff started, since the bills began piling up, she felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. The weeks that followed brought more changes. Betty's Diner became a minor tourist attraction, with people stopping by specifically because it was the place where the pizza incident happened. Betty hired 2 additional servers to handle the increased business. She created a new menu item, the Kindness Special, a pizza combo where a portion of the proceeds went to local children's charities. The processing plant's management, seeing the positive attention Charlotte and Ethan's story had brought to Oakdale, quietly removed her from the potential layoff list. Janet became friendlier, more supportive. The other workers treated Charlotte with new respect. Ethan's teacher organized a school-wide kindness initiative inspired by his example. Students were encouraged to perform random acts of kindness and share their experiences. The program caught on, spreading to other schools in the district. Sheriff Martin started a community dialogue program, bringing together different groups in Oakdale to discuss prejudice and understanding. The first session focused on motorcycle clubs, with Marcus and several other Hells Angels agreeing to participate via video call. The turnout was better than expected, with more than 50 residents attending to ask questions and share perspectives. The Oakdale Rodeo, held in April, invited the Oakland chapter of the Hells Angels to participate as honored guests. They accepted, arriving on their motorcycles to cheers from the crowd. Ethan rode in the opening parade, sitting in front of Marcus on his Harley, waving to the thousands of spectators. But the most profound changes were the subtle ones, the shifts in how people saw each other. Charlotte noticed it in small moments, the way neighbors who'd previously crossed the street to avoid certain people now stopped to chat, the way assumptions were questioned rather than accepted, the way Oakdale began to see itself as a place that valued compassion over conformity. One evening in late May, Charlotte was cooking dinner when Ethan came running in from playing outside. "Mom, Mom, there's a lady down the street who looks really sad. She's sitting on her porch crying. Can we make her some cookies?" Charlotte looked at her son, at his earnest face and concerned eyes. This was who he was now, who he'd always been, someone who noticed suffering and wanted to help. The pizza incident hadn't changed that. It had just revealed it to the world. "Yeah, baby," Charlotte said, pulling out the mixing bowl. "We can make her some cookies." As they measured flour and sugar, as Ethan carefully cracked eggs into the bowl, Charlotte thought about how far they'd come. Not just the attention and the scholarship and the improved circumstances, though those were all wonderful, but the real change was deeper. It was in how they saw themselves, how their community saw them, how a simple act of sharing food had rippled outward in ways none of them could have predicted. Marcus called every few weeks, checking in, seeing how Ethan was doing. The calls had become something Charlotte looked forward to, conversations that ranged from discussing Ethan's latest drawings to comparing notes on dealing with grief to sharing stories about Ray and Derek and the people they'd lost. A friendship had formed, unlikely and precious. The Hells Angel and the single mom, connected by a slice of pizza and a child's compassion. In June, the Oakland chapter held their annual charity ride, raising money for children's hospitals. They invited Ethan to the start line, where more than 200 bikers had gathered. Ethan stood in his honorary vest, waving as the motorcycles roared to life and began their journey. The image made the news again, a follow-up to the original story, showing how one moment of kindness continued to create positive change. By the time summer arrived, the viral attention had faded. The news crews moved on to other stories. The interview requests stopped. Oakdale returned to being a quiet town in California's Central Valley, the kind of place most people had never heard of. But something fundamental had shifted. The town had learned a lesson about prejudice and compassion, about seeing people rather than stereotypes. And at the center of that lesson was a little boy who'd simply wanted to help someone who looked sad. On a warm evening in late July, Charlotte and Ethan sat on their apartment balcony, watching the sun set over the almond orchards. Ethan was sketching, as usual, his pencil moving confidently across the page. He'd gotten better over the past months, his talent developing with practice and the encouragement of his teachers. "What are you drawing?" Charlotte asked. Ethan turned the sketchpad around. It was Marcus sitting on his motorcycle, but the detail was extraordinary for an 8-year-old. Ethan had captured the patches on the vest, the braid in the beard, even the expression in the eyes, no longer devastated but hopeful. "It's for Mr. Marcus," Ethan explained. "For his birthday next month. He told me he's turning 56. "He's going to love it," Charlotte said, and meant it. She could already picture Marcus's face when he received the drawing, the way his weathered features would soften, the way he'd probably frame it and hang it somewhere prominent. "Mom?" Ethan set down his pencil. "Do you think I made a difference, like a real difference?" Charlotte looked at her son, at his serious face and questioning eyes. "Yes, baby, you made a huge difference. You changed how people think. You reminded everyone that kindness matters." "Good," Ethan said simply, "because I want to keep making differences. There are a lot of sad people in the world. I want to help them." Charlotte felt tears threatening again. They came more easily these days, but they were good tears, tears of pride and love and overwhelming gratitude for this remarkable child she'd been blessed with. "Then you will," she said confidently. "You absolutely will." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Charlotte reflected on everything that had changed since that Wednesday afternoon in March. A simple slice of pizza, a moment of compassion, a choice to see past fear and judgment. That was all it had taken to transform a community, to bridge a divide, to prove that humanity existed in the most unexpected places. Ethan had seen what she'd almost missed, that the scariest-looking people sometimes have the gentlest hearts, that appearances deceive, that everyone deserves compassion regardless of what they look like or where they come from. He'd taught their town, he'd taught the Hells Angels, he'd taught her, and the lesson would endure long after the viral videos faded, long after the news stories were forgotten, because it was the kind of lesson that changed people fundamentally, that made them see the world differently. Charlotte pulled Ethan close, kissing the top of his head. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Life would still be hard sometimes. Money would still be tight. Responsibilities would still be heavy. But they had something more valuable than security or comfort. They had a community that had learned to see past prejudice. They had friends in unexpected places. They had the knowledge that one small act of kindness could create ripples that reached farther than anyone could imagine. And most importantly, they had each other. As Charlotte watched the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, she made a silent promise to herself to always remember this lesson, to always choose compassion over comfort, to always teach Ethan that how people look on the outside has nothing to do with who they are on the inside. Because sometimes the scariest person is the one who needs help the most, and sometimes an 8-year-old boy with a slice of pizza can change the world.